Alrighty. All right, so we're going to jump into the last two chapters of Nehemiah, chapters 12 and 13. And so these, as I was preparing for the message on this particular section, the the sort of imbalance that exists in the people at this point. It's like, this huge celebration, and then, sort of the agony of defeat immediately following it. So there's a pendulum swing back and forth, but so we'll jump in. So chapter 12 opens. The first 26 verses of chapter 12 are largely lists of names. So the first list, so verses 1 to 11, are lists of the priests and the Levites and the heads of families that came back from Babylonian exile as soon as the Edict of Cyrus happened. So about 100 years prior to Nehemiah's time. So Zerubbabel, that's mentioned in verse 1, is the guy who led the people back to Jerusalem and began the process of rebuilding the temple. So and so Zerubbabel was the Nehemiah of the day, and Shealtiel Yeshua was the Ezra of the day. So they were the two guys that were in charge. And so then everybody else are the folks that came with them, whether they were leaders of priests and associates and things like that. They're the ones who come back. And
Who
then
was the
there
one
is
for Ezra?
Yeshua. It's Jeshua. It's right towards the end of verse 1. So that's that first generation back out of exile. So this is around 538 or so BC is when they're coming back. And they're towards, so at the end, if you go to verse 10, you see Jeshua was the father of Joachim. Joachim was the father of Eliashib. Eliashib the father of Joiada. Joiada the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan the father of Jaddua. Again, so Jeshua goes back to verse 1, and then it traces his lineage all the way to Jaddua. And but then the name that you want to take note of is Eliashib. Eliashib is the priest that we've heard of before. He's the priest while Nehemiah is the governor. And so verses 12 through 26 is the current generation, the Nehemiah's generation. And so you see Joachim as the high priest. Then there's mention of Ezra, and you go on down, and there's, as for the Levites in verse 22, in the days of Eliashib, so there's Eliashib, and all the way through. So these are all so verses 12 to 26 are the current generation, but Nehemiah does a good job of connecting the previous generations to the current generation. And I'll talk about the importance of that in my message about connecting previous generations with current generations. And then verse 26 sort of wraps things up by saying these were in the days of Joachim, son of Jeshua, son of Josadak, in the days of the governor of Nehemiah and of the priest Ezra the scribe. So he's wrapped everything together. And so now, the days of Nehemiah are about a century after the original returnees. Ezra, obviously Ezra comes 12 years before Nehemiah. Nehemiah comes around 445, and so then so that's where we are. Um, so we've connected from the very beginning of the rebuilding, the post-exilic period, rebuilding the temple, and then now connecting it to rebuilding the city wall. And now we're going to dedicate the wall. So verses 27 through to the end of verse 43 is this whole celebration of the dedication of the wall. And they do it in a particular way. So they bring everybody, they go get all the Levites from their places and bring them into Jerusalem, celebrate the dedication with rejoicing, thanksgiving, with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. There's singers that are gathered from all around Jerusalem, and then the priests and the Levites purify themselves, and they purify the people, the gates, and the wall. So this is all set up for the time of dedication. But if just take a note that they had to bring the Levites from their places to Jerusalem. So the way that the priesthood worked and the Levitical system worked is that there were, only a certain number of Levites and priests that had to be on active duty in Jerusalem at one particular time. And so the rest of them lived in their regular homes for probably 90% of the year. But then when it was their turn, they came to Jerusalem. So what they have to do is they have to go get everybody, bring everybody. So they're getting all the priests, all the Levites to come together to do this. This is a big deal. It's sort of like, in the Methodist system, it's sort of like annual conference. You gather up all the clergy and all the lay representatives together in one particular place, and becomes a big deal. And so verse 30 says that they purified, the priests and Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. So they're setting themselves up for this big celebration. Then Nehemiah says he brings the leaders of Judah up onto the wall, and he divides the company into two, and they begin to walk on top of the wall around the city. They go in opposite directions. One goes to the north and one goes to the south, and they meet back at the temple. So Ezra leads the group that go to that goes to the right, and I think that's right. Let me just double check. One went to the right on the wall to the dung gate, and that's Ezra's in there. And then the other one goes to the left, and that is led, Nehemiah's in that one. So they go in opposite directions, so they completely encircle the wall, encircle the city, and they meet back in front of the temple. Let's see, verse 40. So both companies of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, and the priests, and the folks with trumpets, and the singers sang. And they, verse 43, they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. So the people have encircled the wall. They have come to the temple, and now they begin to offer sacrifices and praise to God for what has taken place over the last 2 months or so. And it's probably a little bit longer just because there was that whole that interlude of the 7th month. So we're probably talking up around 90 days or so here since Nehemiah first came. But the line that I love out of this particular section is the end of verse 43, where it says, "The joy of Jerusalem was heard far away." Just imagine how much if everybody's there. I mean, think of Easter, you know, and or Christmas Eve, and how just loud the singing is because there's just so many people there, and you don't even have to sing loud for all the sound to add up with all of the people. So if everybody's there and everybody's joyful and everybody's excited, it's no wonder the neighboring communities hear what's going on, the celebration that's going on. Um, and again, Nehemiah makes the point that it's not just the men that are there, but the women and the children are there as well. Um, so that's so that's the celebration and the dedication of the wall. One thing I point out for my message is that they don't stand around the wall and worship the wall. They don't worship the project. They worship the God who helped facilitate the project happening. So they put their worship in the right place. They direct it to who it is that needed to receive the glory and honor and praise for it. They don't worship Nehemiah. They don't worship Ezra. They worship God, and that's who is the recipient of that worship and the joy that they are sharing. And you know, the sacrifices that they offer. So then we see, beginning in verse 44, Nehemiah taking advantage of the fact that there are everybody's there that day, and so he says, okay, now we're going to have, you know, people in charge of the storehouses and the contributions and the first fruits and the tithes, and you know, getting everything together. And the priests and the Levites are, you know, ready to go again. And the singers, the gatekeepers, they, you know, they're all getting their responsibilities handed out to them again. And so and it says, for in the days of David and Asaph long ago, there was a leader of the singers, and there were songs and praise, thanksgiving in God. In the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah, all Israel gave the daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers. They set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the descendants of Aaron. So what Nehemiah is telling us is that just as much as at the first time the temple was dedicated and everybody said, we're going to do this, and how much they did that when Zerubbabel came back and they rebuilt the temple then, now it's happening a third time, that they are committing themselves to the work of supporting the worship life of the people. And they are saying, we're all in. So it's similar to what they did at the end of chapter 10, where they're like, we will not neglect the house of our God. This is, you know, we're saying it again. And then we get to chapter 13. But so everything's been handed out. And then it seems like there's a bit of a time gap here. I'm not quite sure, but chapter 13 opens with "on that day," so maybe it's that day that has just ended, or is he's just talked about at the end of chapter 12. But it could be on some other day. It says, on that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, because they did not meet the Israelites with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. So yeah, if on this day that they've had this huge celebration, the law has been read, and now they are seeing, oh my goodness, we've we've messed this up, then they make they hear the scriptures read, and then they're like, we've got to make a change, and so they separate themselves out from uh, from all of those who are of foreign descent, specifically Ammonite, Moabite. Now, there's a couple of uh, the commentators that I read made some particular statements about these couple of verses, in that um, like specifically about the Moabites, because there's a famous Moabite that factors into the story, and that would be Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, and so, but they make the point to say that Ruth was a convert to Judaism. She told Naomi, "Your God will be my God, your people will be my people, and I'll go where you go, and I'll stay where you stay." And so she, left behind what was in her past and started to follow after the one true God. And so, because if I mean, as if she doesn't do that, and David comes from that line because he's like her grandson, um, then um, then what does that say about the monarchy in Israel? And how did they wrap their brains around that? So there's they understand that, okay, she was not she was now part of, she was a grafted in kind of part of the tribe of Israel at that point. Yes, she was, by birth a Moabite, but by practice she was not anymore. So we see sort of this glimpse of, okay, we've read the law, or the law was read to us, and we're going to change. And then we turn to the middle part of chapter 13, where Eliashib has announced, or has made a way for Tobiah the Ammonite to basically take up residence inside a room in the temple. So they've just separated themselves from the Ammonites, but now Tobiah the Ammonite is taking up residence in the house of God, because of the intermarriages that Tobiah has done into the high priestly family. And so it's in order for Tobiah to have space, the grain offering, frankincense, vessels, tithes that were supposed to be given to the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the priests have all been displaced. They're all now somewhere else, or they're no longer being collected as effectively and with as much regularity. Verse 6 is Nehemiah back here saying, "While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes of Babylon, I went to the king. After some time, I asked leave of the king and returned to Jerusalem, and then I discovered the wrong that Eliashib had done on behalf of Tobiah." So it's the phrase that came to mind was, "When the cat's away, the mice will play." That was the phrase that came to mind. It's like, we did all this good stuff, we said all the right things, and and Nehemiah the governor set things in place, and then he had to go on a business trip, and now we don't know when he's going to come back. I think Jesus tells a parable about this. Anyway, but they almost, again, I don't know how much time has passed. Some commentators put it at 3 or 4 years. There's no real specifics about when Nehemiah comes back. but in that interim period, they have displaced temple offerings with an Ammonite who's taken up residence there. And now because of that, now Levites and priests and singers have to go back to their homeland, or they have to go back to their farmland and fend for themselves because the people aren't giving to support them. And if they are, the stuff's not being distributed in the way that it's supposed to. And so Nehemiah has to step back in. He says in verse 8, I was very angry and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the room. Then I gave orders and they cleansed the chambers, and I brought back the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. And so then he then rebukes, NRSV says remonstrated. I had to look that up, but it's basically rebukes them. The officials, why is the house of God forsaken? This sounds also very familiar to a Jesus story as well. And he gathers them together, he sets them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. And then he appoints new people. He says, okay, the treasurer over the storehouses is going to be Shelemiah, the scribe Zadok, and Pedaiah of the Levites, and their assistant Hanan, son of Zachar, son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their duty was to distribute to their associates. So he put somebody people who are faithful in charge of distributing the things that needed to be distributed to the priests and the Levites and the singers and all that. And so he removes, Tobiah's stuff. He says, you're going to bring the grain in. Yes, ma'am.
You can finish your thought.
Oh, okay. I'm almost. I was going to stop at the end of 14, but so he has all these people, these new folks come in. He trusts them, and he says, okay, we're gonna try this again, and then they start. The people respond, and they start bringing the tithes back in, and things turn back the way that they're supposed to. And then Nehemiah prays at the end of 14, remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for his service. So he responds the way that he's supposed to in the midst of what's going on. And we see the pattern again of praying that Nehemiah has done throughout this book. That he always returns to God in prayer, whether that's for wisdom and guidance, or whether in this particular case it's for the idea of God remembering what's happened, and that he's done it for the Lord, not for his own glory or anything like that. Okay. Yes, ma'am. All right, Gail, go right ahead.
Well, I had two questions. One was, my Bible says that Eliashib had married Tobias's daughter, which is why he was favoring Tobias. But since he married an Ammonite, would that make him ineligible, not eligible, to be a priest?
So yes, and that's why. So that's why Nehemiah is so upset in this moment, is that he's, he again, they've already talked about the mixed marriages deal. Ezra talked about it at the end of Ezra, the book of Ezra. They've talked about it before here, and they bring it up again at the beginning of chapter 13, and it's like, it's almost like Nehemiah is trying to tell them, wow, don't you get it yet? That this is a bad deal. Let's see, I think, trying to remember. Oh, well, he'll come back to it again at the end of the chapter, and he brings up Solomon and talks about how Solomon was, the wisest man that ever lived, and yet all these foreign wives that he had drifted him away from the Lord, so that at the end of his life, he was, he was struggling in that. So, okay.
The other question I had was that they still, they felt it was important to worship in Jerusalem. Well, I guess there was a question about that. Why was it important to worship in the house of, in the temple? And I'm guessing that the ark was no longer, it had been taken away. And if the people felt like that God dwelt in the ark, or on the lid of the ark, did they still feel that God was dwelling in the temple even though the ark was no longer there?
So yes, they felt that that the temple was the dwelling place of God, and which is why, and that temple was in Jerusalem. Therefore, when the people are in exile, there is this sense that they have been abandoned and forsaken, and they can't worship because they are not at the place where God is. So there's this real location-based understanding of worship for Judaism at this point in time. Is that the temple is where God dwells. That's where the ark is, and so and you see the same thing in even in the wilderness period, where the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is the symbol of the presence of God. And so, wherever it goes, they follow because they want to follow where God is. And so when they set up the tabernacle, it's like, and the cloud descends on it, they know that God is there. And so it's this visual reminder of God's presence. So when that goes away in the exile, it becomes hard for people to worship in the same way, because they had such that location-based understanding.
Now, I remember that in Daniel, when he would worship, he would face toward Jerusalem.
Right.
Do the Jews believe that? Because isn't in Islam, don't they face toward Mecca? But do Jews still do the same thing?
Right. So I don't know the answer to the question about whether the Jews do that today or not. It would seem to me that they would do something similar to that. But yes, I do know that that Muslims face towards Mecca during their prayer time, because that's the holy city for them, and so that's and again, if you you could ask the question, or or do the thought experiment of, should Christians face towards the east, or face towards Jerusalem, as part of our because Judaism is part of our lineage as well. So I don't know if anybody asked that question, that thought experiment. All right. Any other questions before we jump to the last couple of parts of chapter 13? Anything I skimmed over that you were like, hey, wait a minute? Okay. All right. Well, I'll keep going then. So beginning in verse 15, Nehemiah realizes that the Sabbath is not being honored again. And so he says, he sees people trading wine presses, bringing heaps of grain, and buying and selling things. And and he says, again, he rebukes them in verse 17, remonstrated again in the NRSV. He rebukes the nobles of Jerusalem and says, what is this evil thing that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your ancestors act in this way? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So he's giving them a quick history lesson. Like, you did this before, or your ancestors did this before, and it didn't turn out well. Why would you want to do this again? And so he says in verse 19, when it began to be dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. So from that Friday evening, as the sun is going down, the gates close all day Saturday, and the gates don't open until the Sabbath is over. Now, the Sabbath is technically over at sundown on Saturday. So that's when the gates could open. It doesn't specifically say if he waits until sunrise, on Sunday morning, but he says, for sure they're going to be closed the entire Sabbath. And then he goes further than that to say he puts servants at the gates to prevent any burden from being brought in. So anything, commerce-wise being brought in. And then those who were used to the gates being open on the Sabbath and selling and things like that, they come to the gates and they're like, what's happening? And so it only takes them a couple of times before they figure out they're not going to open the gates anymore on the Sabbath. So they stop doing it. And he says, he warned them in verse 21, why do you spend the night in front of the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. And from that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath. I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember this also in my favor, God, oh my God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. Again, another prayer in response to the work that he is doing. And engaging in to once again sanctify the Sabbath and to keep it holy. Then starting in 23, bring back up the idea of mixed marriages, and this time he gives more of a reason. Talks about he goes back to what he said back in chapter 10, which is I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, you shall not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. And then gives the example of Solomon. Did not Solomon of Israel sin on account of such women? Among the many nations, there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women? So he's just reminding them again that the people of God are meant to be set apart. They're meant to be different. They're meant to be holy unto the Lord, and intermingling with those who do not yet worship the one true God is just asking for history to repeat itself, where he's telling them, we ended up in exile. Our ancestors ended up in exile because this happened, along with several other things. But this was part of it, is that our focus was diverted away from Yahweh, and now then we end up in Babylon, we end up in Assyria, and we end up with the temple in ruins and the wall broken down, and on the verge of not being a people anymore. But there's always a remnant. Verse 28, one of the sons of Jehoiada, son of the high priest Eliashib, was the son-in-law of Sanballat. Oh, Sanballat. He thought we were getting away from having him back in the story, but here he is again. Oh, Sanballat the Horonite. I chased him away from me. Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, the covenant of the priests, and the Levites. So not only did Tobiah marry into the high priest family, but Sanballat did too. Somehow he gets in there, and so these two guys that were vehemently opposed to the wall project and against Nehemiah from the very beginning have finagled their way into the high priest's family by marriage, and are continuing to cause havoc among the people. And and finally he just I love the fact that he just chased them away. I mean, it's like I don't know if he did it with a sword or a big stick, or runs him out. I don't know how he does it, but it's almost like this. It feels like it's almost this moment of complete triumph, and being like, all right, you thought this wasn't going to work. You thought we were crazy for doing this. You thought it would never happen. Here it is. Here it happened. And now, I'm going to take all of that and use it to get you out of here. Even though you kind of weaseled your way back in, you and Tobiah. And so it's, I don't know, it's a fun little word, visual for me of him chasing him out. Verse 29 is another prayer. Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, the covenant of the priests, and the Levites. So he's praying that that God will remember, that the people have, don't forget the people. Don't forget what's happened, but remember that that they are still your people. And then verses 30 and 31 is sort of the interesting wrap up to the book. So 30 and 31 say, thus I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work. And I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, oh my God, for good. One more prayer. So, so he says, I cleansed and I established and I provided. And at no point does Nehemiah say in this sort of synopsis at the end that, oh yeah, and I built the wall. We remember Nehemiah for building the wall. That's sort of his claim to fame from our perspective, looking at it. But from his perspective, it was all about restoring the people. It was all about restoring the people to God and to their right relationship with God, allowing them to be rid of things that would distract them from God, allowing the people who were responsible for worship to have what they needed and understand their roles, and then for the people to then to respond to God in a way that enabled the ongoing work of God in their lives. So cleanse them from everything foreign. He established the duties of the priests and Levites, and he provided for the wood offering and for first fruits. And so it feels like, in Nehemiah's estimation, the wall was like a means to an end, and that end being the restoration of the people. It was a big means. It was a big project. It was a big deal for it to happen. But this, I think if we, for me, and I'll there will be a time for me to come back to this in the worship setting, in one of our worship settings, is that I think the biggest deal for Nehemiah, the biggest part of all of this, is the restoration of the people, the restoring them to their their proper relationship with God, that that enables them to truly be the people of God. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because it is. This is like one of the most Christ-like moments in the Old Testament for me. It is this, it is one of those precursors to what Jesus does in the New Testament to establish the new covenant. Jesus comes to set the people right with God again, to cleanse them, cleanse us from our sin, to set us back into right relationship with God, so that we can worship freely, we can respond to God and hear from the Holy Spirit about how we are to live in relationship with God. And for me, this is what and this is what Nehemiah is leading up to for us as followers of Christ. Now, obviously, we read the Old Testament with New Testament eyes, and so if we if I went to a synagogue or something like that, and I was having a conversation with the rabbi, whatever, talking about Nehemiah, he wouldn't see it that way, and he wouldn't see, he would see Nehemiah as a messianic precursor, but he wouldn't connect it to Jesus. He would connect it to the long anticipated messianic figure that Judaism is still awaiting. So there's that's the difference there. We see Jesus and we go, all right, he's the Messiah, he's the Son of God, he's the one who came to set us right. And then we read back to the Old Testament and we see these characters, we see these people that acted in messianic ways, people like Nehemiah, people like Moses, people like Abraham, people like David. They responded to God in ways that lead the people closer to God, but as far as Judaism is concerned, that still has not been fully fulfilled. That Messiah that they are awaiting has not come yet, and so they wait. All right, I'm probably going to spend a whole message on that, but hopefully. Okay, what other questions? I'll step down from my pulpit.
Number 3 in the questions.
All right. What do you notice about the celebration for dedicating the wall around Jerusalem? How do you think this would be different than a regular worship service? All right. That's the one?
Yep. Okay.
So again, if you look at the logistics around what's going on, it's a big to-do. If everybody's there, then it's a big to-do. It's Christmas, it's Easter kind of scenario, and while I've been to several synagogue worship services, I've never seen anything like this. There's certainly there's a certain amount of pageantry that exists, and exists in Christian worship too. You think about choirs processing in, You know,
Choirs. Yeah, we gotta have two choirs. We gotta split our choir and come in,
Right.
process from the back
yes,
on our first Sunday.
right. Yes, we're working on that. I toyed with the idea of having us march around the building and then coming in.
Yes. Or at least through the rooms and the halls.
Right. Yeah, I thought about, I talked to my Debbie about that, and she's like, well, what if they just like split in the foyer and they came in the side doors, and
Yeah.
kind of sort of. I was like, well, that's probably a good compromise. We could probably figure
Yeah.
that out. So,
That's a good idea.
Yes.
so yes, there will.
Rededication of our walls, just like in
Right.
Nehemiah.
But we
Yeah.
have to have cymbals and harp
And harps and lyres.
I'll do the cymbals.
Yeah. Don't put me on the lyre, because I'm not gonna know
I'm
what to do.
sure Casey will nix that idea.
Mhm, mhm. Right.
Aren't
but-
weren't their worship services usually more solemn? I mean, with usually for a regular worship service, they didn't really have all the instruments and as much singing, did they? This seemed like it was more of a joyous celebration, but I thought
Right.
the regular worship services were a little more solemn,
Mhm.
because it was,
Right.
confessing
I would
sins of the
imagine.
people.
Yeah. Again, I don't know the exact answer to that, but I would say that on feast days, on big festival holidays, kinds of things, yes, there would be. They pull out all the stops, similar to Christmas, similar to Easter in our traditions. But for your regular Sabbath, yeah, you'll still have music, but it's not going to be
Eye
every single,
opening.
yeah, it's not going to be this like blow your hair back kind of volume that we're seeing in this. There may be, yes, there's going to be reading of the Torah. Yes, there's going to be singing. Yes, there's going to be praying. Yes, there will be some, some exposition and interpretation of the text by the rabbi or by the priest, whatever. And yes, those things will happen, but it won't be this. It won't be this every single time. This is, again, this is like pulling out all the stops. And so, when we talk about our first Sunday back, I mean, we've already started talking about it. And what I noticed is that it's very similar to what's here, and even before, I mean, I'd read I'd read chapter 12 already a couple of times, but then in looking at, there's actually a liturgy for dedicating church buildings and stuff like that. And it has this, procession in, it has the big moments, it has the, dedication of the pulpit and the baptismal font and the Lord's table and a bit of a rededication of the people. So adding those elements plus the things that I want to do specifically in our particular case, I mean, it's going to be for lack of a better way of putting it, a production. There will be lots of volunteers that are participating. There'll be lots of moving pieces in this. It's one of those, we're probably going to have a couple of rehearsals to get this, to get it right. Because if we left it up to Sunday morning and be like, oh, no, we should have thought about somebody going that way instead of that way. And anyway, but anyway, it's, yeah, so no, regular worship would not have been this much, this over the top. This is certainly a big deal. There wouldn't have been marching on the wall, I suppose, prior to. That help, Gary? What other questions? You're good.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
That's
I'm
right.
ready for the
Give me your
celebration.
best. Give me your best
Yep.
shot, folks.
That's it.
Mhm.
It was so good just to be there singing hymns in
Mhm.
church in a choir robe, even though we were burning up. It
Yeah.
still was, it was good to be back.
Yep. Just wait for it. So, starting Sunday,
I know.
you're gonna see Sandy and Don
Yeah.
singing in the choir. Yep. Yeah. Every time we've done one of those recordings, it's always like, okay, we get 3 or 4 songs done. It's like, turn on the air. It's hot in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we can't have the air conditioning on while we're recording because it comes across the microphones. So
Uh.
it's tough. And they're
Is
wearing
hot.
the polyester.
Is that gonna get fixed? Is that gonna be fixed or?
Well, it's not a matter of being fixed. The air conditioning works. It's just that if you turn it
Feeds
on,
off.
if it's running while we're recording, it gets on the recording and interferes with the singing. So.
But it won't interfere with live
Oh no.
worship.
Gary, this is all in little room 204,
210.
210. I mean, it's just in a little room, and it,
So and
not
you
a
know,
pretty
the reality
sight.
is, there's there were 11 of us in that room.
Yeah.
And and 7 of them or 8 of them were singing, full volume. So
And one of them holding a 20-inch box fan.
well, yes. You Sandy, you and Don came in on the tail end of all of that. It's been a comedy show every time doing that.
Yep.
You would if we played the cut parts for people, they wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't believe that it's that ridiculous sometimes.
Well, you need to tape choir practice a few times. We've been there.
I bet. Casey is Casey.
So what are we doing from here forward? And
Sure.
are we done with Zoom or what?
Oh, well, so so my plan is to go back and I'm going to do a dive into chapter 8 in Nehemiah, talk about the tabernacles, that's the Sukkot, and kind of spend some time digging into that and the implications of why is it necessary to remember that we are temporary, or we have a temporary dwelling, and that I'm going to spend some time in chapter 9 and the recounting of Israelite history and the idea of why we need to remember where we've been in order to make different choices into the future. And then I will spend some time in 13 again. I don't talk much about 13 in my message for this coming Sunday. I spend most of my 90% of my time in chapter 12 for Sunday's message. So then I'm going to come back to the reforms that Nehemiah does, and talk about how we talk about Sabbath, talk about the proper worship of God, and being different because we are followers of Christ, being different than the rest of the world because we're followers of Christ. So I've got 3 more weeks that we'll spend in Nehemiah, but it'll be a retread of places we've been. And I'll preface that with, I've already got sort of my opener for next Sunday, is that when I was in seminary, I had a professor of theology who we had an extensive reading list for intro to theology. We probably in a 13-week semester, I think we read 15 books. had a paper of some length on each one of them that was due throughout the, each week. I mean, pretty much every time we had class, there was a paper due. And he got to the end of the semester and he said, if I had my way, we would do this class again with all of the same books. And this time you would understand because you've read it. And, not that we were stupid, not that we didn't get it, at some level already, but he said that second reading through and that second processing through brings deeper understanding. And so that's going to be kind of my opener and the rationale behind why we're going to go back to these particular things. So at least 3 more weeks in Nehemiah. So that'll take us through the middle of August. And at that point, then I may just do preacher roulette and, I'll do that's what I'll preach on. No, I don't. I promise you, I don't ever do that. But it'll be. But we'll be close to knowing like when our first Sunday back is by that point, and if not already, and then we'll be able to say, okay, I've got a week or 2, and then we're back in the building, and I might take a turn out of the pulpit. But that's to be seen and discerned at this point. So I know for sure we're going to do chapters 8 and 9 and 13.
Will we have study sheets or just listen to the sermon?
I think that I haven't felt compelled to do an additional study sheet for these weeks, but I'm happy to, because I'm recording them again, I'm happy to still do the Zooms, and I can give y'all a heads up of where the message is going, because by that time I will have preached it, because I preach on Tuesdays. So I will know where the message lands, and I can give y'all some heads up insight into that if you want to still follow along with that. Gary, if your class is gonna move in a different direction, or some of your folks are moving in a different direction, that's we can cross that bridge.
I would anticipate we would stay with Nehemiah as long as you're preaching on Nehemiah. And then when we get to the end of that, then we'll probably, some of us will migrate away from it, and the rest will find a different way to do it.
That's fine. And like Gary, like I told you on the phone yesterday, and I'll tell y'all too, and Sandy and Gail, if there's enough interest, to do something in the middle of the week, then I'm more than happy to get that set up. If some folks, don't want to plug in to another Sunday, like Gary, if you're, if there's folks that want to do, something that's based on the sermon and the different thing that your class is doing, then obviously they wouldn't be able to do that in the Sunday school hour. So it need to be some other time during the week. And so we can make that an option with both in-person and virtual options. We will still have all of that. So,
hopefully I'll know something by the end of this weekend as far as who's going to be wanting to do what parts. So I'll let you know.
Very good. Very good. Well, I mean, because if it's like, 6 or 8 people, that's the start of that's a good start on a new group already. So you add in another 6 or 8 and you're off to the races. So because we've had some folks that have come during the hiatus, that as we get back, we will want to get plugged in to a group. We will want to plug them into a group as best we can. And new groups are often really good times for folks to jump into those kind of things. because the dynamic changes.
Okay.
Hi, Gail.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm all sweaty. I've been out cutting trees and
Oh, goodness.
Oh,
Oh,
uh-oh.
goodness.
Yeah, it's a really good time to have a cast on your foot.
Yeah.
for him.
All right.
How's everyone?
We're
Good,
doing
good. Dean, I've got Louis' room number.
Oh, okay. That's
And
that's
his-
Dominique's dad.
Yes, and his last name is Sarcone, Sarcone. But he is in Tower 1, room 347.
And you said that's at
Lake Point,
Like-
whatever it is.
yeah, it's Baylor Scott and White over in
Yeah.
Rowlett.
I think, yep. Rockwall or Rowlett.
It's in Rowlett, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you all
All
so much. Y'all have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
good week.
Bye-bye.